thank you very much for doing this this interview, and I hope things are all right there sa inyo sa Kuala Lumpur.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Bing Kim po, and maraming salamat for having me in your program. Well, okay naman po kami rito personally, at pati po ang embassy, my officers and staff, we are all doing okay, and we are trying our best to perform our work dito sa embassy in trying to provide services sa ating mga kababayan dito sa Malaysia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Mr. Ambassador, let me just ask you this. What are the opportunities right now for Filipino businesses from Mindanao and Palawan, itong tinatawag nating focus areas ng BIMP-EAGA dito sa Pilipinas? Anong pagkakataon po para sa kanila dyan po sa inyo sa Malaysia?
Well, una-una, bigyan muna kita ng big picture ng overall bilateral trade relations natin with Malaysia. Preliminary data nung 2020 ay nagtala tayo ng 5.07 billion US dollars in two-way trade with Malaysia, and we were able to export 1.59 billion US dollars to Malaysia, and we imported 3.49 US dollars worth ng commodities from Malaysia. So meron tayong trade deficit na 1.90 billion US dollars.
What are the products and services that are needed there which we may be able to provide?
Actually, malaki ang potential ng Mindanao and Palawan na makapag-export ng products to Malaysia. Sa aming market analysis, actually, we were able to identify several commodities or products na inaangkat ng Malaysia at pinoproduce naman natin. So, malaking potential natin na pwede nating isupply itong mga products na ito na kailangan ng Malaysia. Number one, for example, ay ang cacao. Malaysia is the largest cacao producer in Asia. Pero gayon pa man, nag-i-import pa rin siya ng raw ingredients, with 95% cocoa beans being imported mostly from Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire from Africa. Pero ang cacao, pinaproduce natin sa Region 11, Davao Region. At we produce 89.42% ng ating national production from this place. Number two, coconut. Malaysia imports 361 million US dollars worth of coconut oil in 2019. Pero alam natin, masagana tayo sa coconut, And sa Mindanao, we produce this coconut dito sa Region 9, Zamboanga Peninsula. Number three, coffee. Malaysia imports 238 million US dollars worth of coffee. Pinoproduce natin ito sa Soxargen, Region 12. Number four, bananas. Malaysia imports 14.8 million US dollars. Pinoproduce natin. Ang dami nating banana dito sa Region 11 din, sa Davao. Processed fruits. Ginagamit ito ng Malaysia in retail and baking industries. Mostly nag-import sila from China, US, and Thailand. Pero pinoproduce din natin ang processed fruits dito sa Region 10, sa Northern Mindanao, which is the lead producer ng pineapple and pineapple-based products. Another product, processed nuts. Malaysia imports 81.3 million US dollars worth of Brazil nuts and cashews for use in the bakery and snack food industry. Pero the Philippines is among the top producers of cashew in the world. In fact, Palawan accounts for at least 90% of national cashew production. So malaking potential ng Palawan to be able to export cashew nuts sa Malaysia. And finally, yung seafood, including processed crustaceans. Malaysia is a coastal nation but still imports about 964.95 million US dollars worth of fish and seafood. And masagana tayo dito sa BARM area natin. And finally, not to mention yung minerals na pinoproduce that could be mined sa Palawan. For example, marble, silica, limestone, nickel, chromite, copper, and many other minerals. Kailangan din ito sa Malaysia. So makikita natin, malinaw na malinaw, na we produce many products, mostly agricultural and minerals, na we could potentially export to Malaysia dahil kailangan din talaga ito ng Malaysia.
Mr. Ambassador, interesting na nabanggit niyo na napakarami ng mga produktong kailangan ng Malaysia galing sa atin na pwede natin i-supply rather. Ngunit, yun nga, we still have that very glaring trade deficit. Ano kaya ang nakikita ninyong dahilan po? Merong pangangailangan naman sa kanila, sa side nila, kaya naman natin pagpunan itong pangangailangan ho na to. Ngunit bakit hindi pa ho nangyayari? Anong nakikita ninyong saan ho, ano yung pagkukulang ho? Saan ho ang saan ang stalemate dito sa na to? Sa relasyon ho natin?
Well, siguro isang dahilan na I can think of. Una-una, itong mga nabanggit kong products from Mindanao and Palawan are agriculture products, no? And alam na natin ang share ng agriculture sa ating national economy, no? Maliit lang siya. Ang number one industry natin ay manufacturing. At manufacturing products din, actually electronic products, ang number one export natin sa Malaysia. Mga integrated circuits, may conductors. So, ang structure ng ating economy, ng ating mga industry, ay number one, manufacturing. Whereas yung mga na-identify na products natin na magagaling na Mindanao, all these are agricultural. And so, in terms of maybe hindi naman priority, no? Mahalaga din sa atin ang agriculture, and the national government recognizes this, the importance of agriculture. Una-una sa ating national livelihood and survival, kailangan natin ng agriculture. Pero siguro second reason, yung production capacity natin, no? Yung mga agricultural farms natin, maaaring limited ang acreage nila, no? Maaaring ang production nila maliit. And of course, ang laki ng domestic market natin, no? 110 million tayo. So, minsan sa mga producers natin, enough na yun, no? Na mag-supply sa ating domestic market. Yung mga produce nila, yung mga products nila, ay enough na, no? Wala silang overproduction o excess production for export pa. And most of our maybe business people are happy, no, and satisfied that they can produce enough to supply the domestic market. So, ilang factors ito na nakikita ko, although potential, pero to be actually realized, no, itong potential na to, there are several factors that we should be able to surmount.
All right. I asked that question simply because in the past few weeks, may mga nakakausap po tayo ng mga business leaders from Palawan and from the BARM area, and even from Mindanao, and they seem to be very, very excited about prospects, particularly kung sa pag-uusapan natin ng Malaysia, particularly sa Sabah area, kasi malapit na malapit nga sa bansa. Ang nakikita nga nila na may market, and then pwede naman nilang mapunuan, except that may mga challenges sila from our end with regard to connectivity, the lack of transport facilities, and they cite yung mga processing facilities din natin dito. So, care to comment on that, Mr. Ambassador?
Well, yung binanggit nilang connectivity, no, actually, may mga initiatives ang national government within the BIMP-EAGA framework to increase yung competitiveness ng ating mga business people, no, dyan sa Mindanao. In terms of priority infrastructure projects, meron initiatives ang national government, no. May mga tinatapos na mga seaports sa Zamboanga, sa Cagayan de Oro, Jensan, Malalag ports in Mindanao, and Coron Port in Palawan, no. So, upon the completion of the seaports, mas ma-facilitate ang kanilang ang transport requirements, no. And speaking of connectivity rin, ay well, pre-pandemic, no, in Philippine Airlines was supposed to open direct flights from Kota Kinabalu to Zamboanga. This was in dapat late 2020, pero nangyari nga yung pandemic. Kung natuloy yun, that would also increase, no, yung connectivity between Mindanao and Sabah in particular, KK. So, and then meron pa rin, we need to identify economic zones in Zamboanga and Picong in Pagadian and San Vicente and Palawan. And we have to increase yung sub-regional value chain development such as BIMP-EAGA rice production and marketing, collaboration coconut production for smallholder farmers. So ilan ito sa mga initiatives ng national government which hopefully would be able to increase the competitiveness of our business people in Mindanao and Palawan.
All right. Mr. Ambassador, nung nakausap po natin ang Mindanao Development Authority, isang binabanggit ko nila yung idea ng complementation. Ibig sabihin, you know, we may not just see, in your case, Malaysia as an end destination for, you know, the products and services that we may be able to provide them and which they need. Pero we could also see, siguro nga maganda rin yung in the case kunyari nung mga cashew nuts or yung mga ibang mga pangangailangan nila na for halal markets, for example, since hindi naman ganun ka mature pa ang ating halal industry dito and food agriculture processing, there may be a means for working with Malaysia in order to target the larger market of the Middle East and even abroad as a whole. What are your thoughts on this, Mr. Ambassador?
Well, nabanggit mo yung halal certification, no? Totoo yun, that could be one of the challenges, no, being faced by our business people in Mindanao dahil well, majority Christian country and wala tayong masyadong halal production. So actually the Philippines is working closely with the Malaysian authorities, in particular itong JAKIM, no, yung halal certifying body ng Malaysia. Natulungan tayo, no, with the halal certification. So meron na tayong ilang halal certifying bodies or authorities sa Philippines na maaari mag-certify na halal, no, halal yung mga products natin, which would enable the entry of our products dito sa Malaysian market. And not only, no, sa Malaysian market, but could be springboard, no, to the bigger Muslim markets dito sa Middle East. So tama nga, we could tap the potential of complementation kung we would be able to increase ang ating production of halal certified products.
May efforts ho ba, sir, from your office to from the Philippine Embassy in Malaysia to help improve itong capability natin to work with halal processors or halal what do you call this, halal markets in general?
Yes, no, yung trade office natin dito sa Malaysia, yung Philippine Trade Investment Center, which is being run by the DTI, no, they are directly in touch with JAKIM, yung Malaysian halal certifying body, to help the Philippines, no, para to increase yung number ng ating halal certifying authorities also. And aside from that, ang ating trade office dito ay tinutulungan, no, yung mga business people natin, especially yung mga MSMEs, no, to be able to penetrate yung Malaysian market. Paano? Well, for example, one, nag-organize sila ng mga Philippine delegation composed mostly of producers nitong precisely mga agricultural products natin from Mindanao, makapag-join ng mga trade fairs, no, dito sa Malaysia. Annually, meron dito isang malaking trade fair, yung MIHAS, yung Malaysia International halal showcase, no? MIHAS, it's an annual event, malaki ito. So yung trade office namin dito, they organize Philippine delegation to be able to participate. And annually, no, may mga nakikita tayo magagandang resulta by their participation. Nadi-discover, no, yung mga products natin ng mga Malaysian either distributors, wholesalers, no, para ibenta dito sa Malaysian market yung mga nakita nilang magagandang products natin from Mindanao.
Mga kaibigan po, si Ambassador Charles Jose ng Pilipinas sa Malaysia. Mga kaibigan, binabati po natin si Tomada Jessie Rayleigh, maayong buntag sir, sabi po niya, at si Lucy Rafael Rabara. Ito, Ambassador Charles Jose, ito ipararating ko sa inyo dahil ikatutuwa niyo ito malamang. Sabi ni Lucy Rafael Rabara, "Good morning sir, gwapo ni Ambassador Charles Jose." Aba, Ambassador, makakarating sa iyo yan. Alright, time right now is 9:29. Magbabalik po tayo sa ating pagbabalik po, no? Pag-usapan ho natin itong Islamic Finance. Noong nakaraang linggo, nagkaroon po doon sa BARM po ng isang conference ang kanilang mga sangay ng pamahalaan nila sa BARM at pinag-usapan ho nila ang Islamic Finance. Ano nga ba itong Islamic Finance na to? Ayan, alamin ho natin yan sa ating panayam kay Maharlika Alonto sa pagbabalik po ng Regional Roundup dito lamang sa Radio Pilipinas. Magandang umaga mga kaibigan. Welcome back to the Regional Roundup dito lamang sa Radio Pilipinas 7:38 AM. At binabati po natin muli si Tomada Jessie Rayleigh, si Lucy Rafael Rabaran na nagsasabing napakagwapo daw ni Ambassador Charles Jose. At makakarating yan, Lucy, hiya mo, pararating natin yan kay Ambassador. By the way, that was just the first part po. Medyo mahaba-haba kwentuhan ho natin kay Ambassador Charles Jose. At marami ho tayong maupulot doon na pwedeng pag-isipan sa ating pag-move forward po. Ito na nga, emerging out of the pandemic, hopefully, di ba? Pagpaplanuhan na ho natin yan. We're still in it, definitely, pero good to think about things moving forward po. Naman, minsan kailangan mag-forward planning ho tayo, mag-recalibrate nga ng mga plano natin sa buhay at sa negosyo. Kasi ito, tinamaan ho tayo. Ano kaya magawa? Ano ba mga bagong pagkakataon? What are the new opportunities out there? Ayan, so patuloy po ang ating second part ng ating interview with Philippine Ambassador to Malaysia, Charles Jose, next week po. In the meantime, binabati po natin si Emma Radaha. Good morning po. Galing siya sa Malolos, Bulacan. Okay, ngayon naman sa pagpapatuloy po ng Regional Roundup dito lamang sa Radio Pilipinas, ang gusto sana nating talakayin, last week ho, nagkaroon ng, last week, nagkaroon ng isang seminar, isang conference, no, sa Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, sa pamahalaan nila, no, at ang kanilang tinalakay, itong usapin tungkol sa Islamic Finance. Alam niyo, sa iba-ibang mga bahagi ho ng Southeast Asia, lalo na sa mga kapitbahay ho natin sa Brunei, sa Indonesia at sa Malaysia, yung BIMP-EAGA, East ASEAN Growth Area rather, ito, malaking bahagi po, malaking parte ang ginagampanan po ng Islamic Finance. Pero ang Islamic Finance, hindi lang po para sa mga Muslim ho yan. Pati ho yun sa non-Muslims, pwede ho yan. So, marami ho mga tanong siguro kayo kung ano ba itong Islamic Finance. Ano bang kahalaga nito? Lalong-lalo na sa BIMP-EAGA at sa ASEAN region na marami sa ating mga kapitbahay ho, mga neighboring countries ho natin, mga Muslim, and they are practicing Islamic finance as well. So sa ating kagusto, malaman kung ano ba itong Islamic finance, kinausap po natin ang isang consultant sa Islamic finance, si Maharlika Alonto. Si Mahar po, kausap po natin from Cagayan de Oro. And let's play that interview with Maharlika Alonto. Mahar, what is Islamic finance vis-a-vis non-Islamic finance? Anong pagkaiba ng dalawang yan?
Okay. Ang general kasi natin na alam, which is conventional finance, the traditional finance, is interest-based. So that's the primary distinction between Islamic finance, because Islamic finance prohibits usury or interest. So instead of a loan, for example, which is a contract, no, you borrow money, you pay interest and principal. For Islamic finance, you take away from interest. So umiikot lang siya sa kung bakit mo kailangan yung money. So do you need to acquire an asset? So a sale contract is used, for example, or a leasing contract is used. So tinatanggal niya yung interest dun sa mismong transaction. So that's basically it. And then the next probably distinction is that you cannot use Islamic finance for non-halal. No? So we talk about pork and pork products, pork derivatives, alcohol, entertainment, itong mga to, hindi siya inaalaw. Banking, for example. No? So these are the industries that will not utilize Islamic finance. So bawal ang interest, yun. But in lieu of interest, you can use profit. So you come in not as debtor, creditor. Hindi siya utang eh. It is an investor, more of an investor in a partnership relationship. No? So if it's an exchange transaction, pupunta kasi isang Islamic bank, for example, instead of a loan, bibigyan kang pera to buy whatever, a house, a car, they will buy it for you. And then they put a certain profit. So yun ang kita ng bangko, no, or the lender, kumbaga. And then ang use mo ng asset is directly related to the money that you borrowed. So whatever happens to it, there is a leeway to that asset itself. Unlike traditional, conventional financing na pag hindi mo nabayaran, may penalty ka, tataas pa yung interest mo, they will accelerate the interest, and then they take out the asset pa. So sa Islamic finance, ang pag-financing on a particular asset, for example, kung ano yung binayad mo, a particular part of it, pag binenta ulit yon because hindi mo natuloy yung financing, no? A particular part of it, babalik sa'yo. Pwede bumalik sa'yo. So it's really asset-based, no? There's an underlying asset or a venture or a business project underneath financing that you have to get. So it's the why you need the financing as compared to just an amount and a repayment.
Okay. Ang tanong dyan is, why was it called Islamic Finance in the first place? Ito ba ay dahil sa pananampalataya ng mga Muslim? And secondly, limited lang ba to sa mga Muslim?
So Islamic finance is essentially really hinged on Sharia, so Islamic law. Bilang mga Muslim, this is not just religion for us. It's really a way of life. So pati ang pangangalakal, so trade, commerce, marriage, legal disputes, lahat yan sinasakupan ng Sharia or Islamic law. So essentially, kahit doon sa financial transaction sa isang Muslim, meron siyang mga qualifications. And interest, the prohibition on interest is one. No? Ang next sa tanong is kung ito available lang ba sa mga Muslim? Hindi. This is available to anyone. So when in fact, no, there are other countries, I think in Malaysia, there was a time that 60% of the patrons of Islamic banking were Chinese, not Muslims. So it's a business, it's still a financial service industry. So yun yung I think kahit na sabihin natin hindi siya gumagamit ng interest, umiikot pa din siya sa dynamic ng isang financial transaction, ng isang financial industry. So an Islamic bank has to earn. Kaya ang next kasi na question ay kung walang interest, paano kikita yung isang Islamic bank, no? Yun, profit sharing. So kailangan niyang i-invest yung pera ng depositor niya in a halal venture na kailangan pagugulan niya ng pansin, no? So if that earns, the bank as a manager of the funds get a portion of it, and the depositor, the investors, no, that come in will also get a portion of it. So it's really a relationship based, no, more than it just being mere a loan. So yang concept na yan naman ng financing, hindi yan applicable lang sa Muslim. Anyone who needs it and who believes in the system is very welcome to partake, kumbaga, doon sa Islamic financial industry.
So how pervasive or how widespread is Islamic finance? And let's talk about it from a global perspective, and let's go down a bit to regional and we're talking about ASEAN and even further down, BIMP-EAGA.
Yes. Globally, the industry is 2.4 trillion US dollars. So we see, obviously, majority of the countries that you see are from the GCC areas. So you see Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, no? But you also see our Asian neighbors. So definitely the BIMP, except the P, the BIM are on the top, no? So Brunei, for example, is 65% of its of its banking industry is Islamic banking. Malaysia is 30% of its industry naman. So Indonesia is around 15 already, no? They're gunning for 20%. But if you talk about Islamic banking alone, it's 1.7 trillion US dollars. So this is across the world. You see it in Africa, you see it in Europe. The UK and Netherlands, for example, are big Islamic bonds issuers already. So halo-halo siya because ang Islamic finance naman, apart from it being a tool for financial inclusion for Muslims, for the general finance industry, including the conventional, it is also their way of looking at diversifying their portfolio. Kasi nga, wala siyang interest. Alam natin, ang merkado talaga around the world revolves around interest. Because it's actually the finance industry that we are all aware of. No? So when you put an asset-based or asset-backed industries such as Islamic finance, you really are diversifying your portfolio. So we see players that are coming in that are just there to merely diversify their portfolio. So in that sense, ang reception for Islamic finance has really evolved. No, it's not just because they want to cater to the Muslim market, but really to get a pie of how the entire Islamic financial industry services is already working.
All right, now if it's working in different parts of the world, let's talk about the Philippines. Are we already operating Islamic finance in the Philippines? And if yes, to what extent are we doing it?
Well, I can answer it in two ways. No, the thing that I'm always very proud of is that ang Philippines actually were the first in the world, if I'm not mistaken, to have an Islamic commercial bank. Because Philippine Amana Bank, the predecessor of our current sole Islamic financial bank, was established in 1972. The first commercial bank that we know of were established around 1975, 1980s. So that answers the question na nandito na ba yan sa Pilipinas? Matagal na siyang nandito, no? But in terms of the volume, the transactions that it has, unfortunately, hindi talaga siya lumago, no? Hindi siya lumawak. There are still frameworks and legalities that were being hashed out because kasi nag-iisa lang siya. So in terms of how, for example, the liquidity of the bank comes around, the volume of halal industries that we also have in the Philippines, maliit. So meron, yes, we do have Islamic finance and Islamic banking in the Philippines, but as to the volume that we think, the critical threshold, for example, to actually say that we have a working Islamic financial sector in the country, medyo maliit pa. So currently, there is a Amana Islamic Bank that offers it. ASA Philippines is a microfinancial institution that offers Islamic microfinancing programs. I know of certain pockets of organizations that offer very specific Islamic financial products, but hindi siya under a financial institution. Like 5 years ago, Peace and Equity Foundation did, I think, 5 Islamic financial contracts for specific organizations in the ARMM in the former autonomous region. So these are pockets that we're seeing, but as to a holistic financial services comparable to our BIMP-EAGA neighbors, for example, wala pa tayo doon. Hindi pa tayo umabot sa ganong critical mass, kumbaga.
Isang siguro mahalagang step dyan ngayon with BARM around, nagkaroon sila last week ng isang 2-day conference on Islamic finance. Tell us about that. What was the intention and where do you see that conference going from there?
Okay. last year, the BARM really envisioned Islamic finance to be a necessary development tool. No? Ang nakita is obviously the level of awareness and understanding of what Islamic finance, even in the BARM, is really low. So that comparable also to the financial literacy that we see, no? Ang una talagang tinakol doon was we should have an advocacy and awareness campaign. And this preceded the conference. So meron silang weekly na pinapalabas doon sa Bangsamoro. I think Facebook nila na page, no, that talks about the basics of Islamic finance. And definitely that was a first step in looking at very workable interventions on Islamic finance in the BARM. So the two-week conference last week was really actually for BARM officials because the proponents, no, and the leadership wanted the different offices and ministries in the BARM to understand that Islamic finance is already being utilized in other jurisdictions, not just for business, but even more for government, no, na infrastructure projects and interventions, especially now in COVID, no, na we're looking at the pandemic initiatives in different countries. So ang nakikita ng BARM government is because it wants to leapfrog into a halal ecosystem player, Islamic finance is a necessary component of it. So Islamic finance can enable it. Islamic finance is part and parcel of that halal ecosystem. So naiintindihan ng BARM leadership na bago natin talakayin yung bigger picture of a halal ecosystem, because this is an ecosystem. So it's very comprehensive, it's very dynamic. We should have this venue for our planning officers mainly. That was the participants that we had last week, for them to understand what Islamic finance is and the differences and the similarities it has with conventional finance and how this is actually being used already. So the good thing is that we have a host of different organizations that were willing to help. No, so that was the second day. The first day was more of a introduction to Islamic finance and the components of it. The second day actually was more of the resource persons that we have from abroad and local resource persons who talked about their own business models on Islamic finance. So my cooperatives, my charity, my Islamic crowdfunding, there was Islamic microfinance. So ito yung mga gustong pinakita na we don't necessarily need to establish a big Islamic bank in the BARM to have it rolling, but probably to look at the very doable and pragmatic approaches of Islamic finance that is already working, no, that we can look into for the BARM.